Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf contains 3 Mishnayos, and therefore it really has 3 separate discussions. From the beginning of the Daf until the first Mishnah is discussing the sugya where you have an object which is partially in and partially out of Rishos Harabim. Is it considered to be carrying? Is it considered to be transferred to Rishos Harabim or not? Then we get to the first Mishnah on the Daf, which will discuss the normal ways of carrying and the abnormal ways of carrying where it's a shinoi and it's not aser d'oraisa. The next Mishnah will discuss if an object slipped. You intended to carry it one way and it ended up being carried in an abnormal way or vice versa. What happens then? What does that count as? And the last Mishnah will discuss if you have 2 people doing a malacha together, which one is chayiv, or neither of them chayiv, or in what circumstances are they both chayiv. Okay, so first of all, we're in the middle of a discussion here about what happens when you have an object which is in Rishos Yachid and you transfer it partially into Rishos Harabim. So the Mishnah says that if it's a fruits in a basket and it's partially out in Rishos Harabim, it's not considered to be out. So we have a machlokes here between Abaya and Rava. Rava says we have to be referring to a case where it was very long fruits that filled up the basket, and therefore there is no fruit that's totally out in Rishos Yachid, because the basket being partially in doesn't mean that the fruits are still in. And therefore, if you had small fruits that were totally out, even if the basket is partially in, those fruits that are out would be considered to be out, and you transferred it from Rishos to Rishos Yichayev. Abaya says the opposite. Abaya says no, as long as the basket's partially in, even if you have small fruits, the basket keeps it considered to be in Rishos Yachid, and it's not transferred to Rishos Harabim. You didn't violate transferring from Rishos to Rishos yet. Then the Gemara says that Abaya and Rava switched, and they ended up saying the other way. And the Gemara has a kasha that we have a brisa where they seem to say, like they said originally. What's that brisa? It's discussing where somebody transferred an object from Rishos Yachid to Rishos Harabim, either with his hand or in an object. So Abaya says if he did it with his hand, so then it's considered to be transferred out. Because even though his hand is part of his body is still in, that doesn't count to keep the object in Rishos Yachid, it's out. If, however, it's in a kli, so the kli counts to keep it in. That's like he said originally. Now Rava says the other way. Rava says as long as his hand is holding it, since he's still in Rishos Yachid, it's not considered in Rishos Harabim as long as it's still in his hand. If, however, it's in a kli, so the kli doesn't count as holding it in, and therefore the kli, the object is out, the object is in Rishos Harabim, even though the kli is still partially in Rishos Yachid. So it's a contradiction to the idea that they switched their opinions, and the Gemara says, well, we have to switch this also, switch the names here, and it's not an issue. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me over here that there's an opinion that if somebody's standing in Rishos HaYachid and he stretches his hand into Rishos Harabim with an object, that is for him to be chayiv, that's considered like he transferred it from Rishos to Rishos, even though he's still standing in Rishos Harabim and the object is still in his hand. The Gemara says, I'll show you clearly the opposite. The first Mishnah, the entire Masechta, said that if a man is standing in his own Rishos and he stretches out his hand across the fence into Rishos Harabim, and the poor man it takes from his hand, neither of them did a complete melacha, because neither of them did akira and hanacha. He picked it up and moved it out, but he didn't put it down, and the poor man took it, a moving object, and he put it down, but he didn't lift it up in the first place. But according to what you're telling me, that it's considered to be out of his rishos as soon as he crosses the line, even though he's still holding it in his hand. So then in this case, the Baal Bayis who's holding it, as soon as he crossed the line, it's considered like he put it down, and he's chayav for just crossing the line. It doesn't help that he's still holding it in his hand. Someone says, no, that's different. In that Mishnah over there, he was holding it very high above the ground, more than 3 tvachim above the ground. Therefore, it never came to rest. Rav was talking about where he was within 3 tvachim of the ground, and therefore it's considered as if it came to rest. His chiddush is that the fact that it's in his hand, it doesn't help you. Our Mishnah also agrees the fact that it's in his hand doesn't help you. Our Mishnah is saying that it never came to rest because you're too high. That's why it's not an issue. Okay, this is the end of this Gemara. Now we get to the next Mishnah, which lists situations in which carrying is normal and carrying is not normal. If you're carrying in a not normal way, it's a malacha with the shinoi. Malacha with the shinoi is not an iser deraisa, it's only an iser derabanan. So let's see the Mishnah. Well, first of all, the normal ways of carrying an object are either hand, left or right, in your lap or on your shoulders. How do you know that this is okay? Because these are the ways that the Kahanim, the Leviim, Bnei Kahas, carried the kalim of the Mishkan. Now these are the ways which are not normal. If it's on his foot, if it's in his mouth, if it's in his armpit, in his ear, in his hair, if it's in his money belt, which was kind of like a fanny pack that they wore tied around the waist, but the money belt is upside down so that the mouth is downwards and it could fall out, or it's between his money belt and his shirt, or it's sewn into the bottom of his coat, or it's in his shoe, or in his sandal. In all these cases, it's not normally to carrying it, and what's common about all these things is that the object is not secure. It could fall out, and therefore it's not normal, it's a shinoi, and you're not chayav for carrying it deraisa, it's only an iser derabban. The Gemara begins by learning a different halacha from the way that the Bnei Kahas carry the kelim of the Mishkan, and that's that if you carry something high in the air, more than 10 tefachim above the ground, even though you're not in Rosh Hashanah, but it still counts as carrying, and it's still usher. How do you know that? Because the way the Bnei Kahas carried the kelim was over 10 tefachim in the air. There was more than 10 tefachim of space between the bottom of the kelim and the floor. How do you know? The Gemara have two ways of deriving this. So here's the first one. First of all, we have a pasuk which says Al Mishkan V'Al Mizbeach Saviv. We are comparing the Mishkan and the Mizbeach. That teaches us, just as the Mishkan was 10 amos tall, the Mizbeach was 10 amos tall. Even though the Psukim described it as 3 amos tall, that's only referring to the top part of it. Now, first of all, how do you know that the Mishkan itself was 10 amos tall? That it says Eser amos Eirech HaKaresh, each plank wall was 10 amos long. Okay, now, fine, very good. So now we know that the Mizbeach was 10 amos tall. Therefore, what? So the next thing is that the Leviim were 10 amos tall themselves. How do you know? Because when Moshe built the Mishkan, it says, Mishkan, he spread the covering over the Mishkan. It must have been very tall to be able to do that, at least 10 amos high. Moshe was probably representative of all the Leviim. It's from the same family, so we're assuming all the Leviim were 10 amos high. That being the case, the Leviim were 10 amos high, and we know that the Leviim carried the kelim by putting the poles on their shoulders, and the poles are generally positioned 2/3 of the way up on the object, which means that when they carried the Mizbeach, the poles were 2/3 of the way up. That means that it was 6 2/3 amos above the bottom of the Mizbeach. That means that the Mizbeach hung 6 2/3 amos from 10 amos high, which is how tall the Levium's shoulders were, if they were as tall as Moshe was, which we're assuming. That means that the clearance between the bottom of the Mizbeach and the ground was 3 1/3 amos. That's significantly more than 10 tvachim, and amma is 6 tvachim, therefore that's well over 10 tvachim. So therefore you see that's how the Bnei Kahas carried that high, and therefore you're chayav for carrying, even if you carry that high the whole time. Now, another way of deriving this is from the Aron. The Aron was 9 tvachim tall, like it says clearly, and it was covered by a kapiris, which was 1 tefach thick. So it's a total of 10 tefachim tall, the entire thing. Now, 2/3 of the way up would be 6 2/3 tefachim. That means that the Aron hung 6 2/3 from the poles, which are on the shoulders of the Leviim, and that is significantly higher than 10 tefachim above the ground. Now, this works even if the Leviim were not 10 amos tall. Even if they were normal height of 3 amos tall, it would still be a clearance of more than 10 tefachim. So now the Gemara says, why do you have to say this? We already know that the Leviim are 10 amos high. The Gemara says, no, maybe just because Moshe was 10 amos tall doesn't necessarily prove that all the Leviim were 10 amos tall, because Moshe was a Navi, and we know that Nevi'im have to be rich and wise and strong and very tall. So not necessarily all the Levi'im that tall. Now the Gemara discusses a way of carrying things which is not in the Mishnah at all. What if you carry on your head? So the Gemara has a few versions of this, which will end up very different from the beginning. First of all, Rav said the name of Rav Chia, so that counts as carrying because the people of Hutzel carry like that. So the Gemara says, why should we follow the Hutzel people? Most people in the world don't carry things on the heads. So the Gemara says, okay, so if one of the Hutzel people carry that way, this is what he said. If one of the Hutzel people carry that way, then he's chayiv, because that's how everybody in Hutzel carries. So he says, hold on a second, what do you mean? It shouldn't be significant. Most of the world doesn't carry that way. It shouldn't matter that the Hutzel people, since when do we follow the people of your city itself? So he says, yeah, this is what I mean to say. He meant to say that if you carry on your head, you're not chayiv, because the only people that carry that way are Hutzel people, and their das is batal to everybody else. It doesn't count as carrying. Okay, this takes us to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah discusses what happens if an object slipped from a way which is protected to a way which is not protected, or vice versa. Okay, so first of all, the Mishnah says if you intended to carry the object slung in front of you and it ended up sliding behind you, so you're not chayav for that. If, however, it was the opposite, you had it slung over your shoulder behind you and then it slipped around and came in front of you, then you are chayav for that. Now, a woman who wears something stuck in her slip or some underclothing that she wore, so that's not a problem. She's chayav either way, even if it moved around from front to back or from back to front, because it's common for those things to shift around, and she can't say that's not how I meant to carry it. Rabbi Yehuda says that letter carriers, mailmen, are also, they can't say that's not how I meant to carry it because they run around a lot and their letter sacks shift around front and behind all the time. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara wants to know what is the difference between whether it slipped from front to back or from back to front. Either way, the implication seems to be that if it didn't work out, we would have understood that if it didn't work out the way you intended it to, so it's considered misasek, you didn't do it the way you wanted to do it, and therefore you shouldn't be chayav for that. Why is there a difference which way it slipped? So the Gemara has three opinions here. First of all, Rav Elazar says, you're right, it's a contradiction. And the one who said the first halacha didn't say the second halacha, because if you hold that it makes a difference whether it's the way you intended or not, then it shouldn't matter whether it was front or back. Rava says, no, not necessarily. It makes a lot of sense. When it slipped to a way which is a better shmira, that's a more normal carrying, so then for that you're chayav. If you intend to have it slung over your back and it ended up being carried in a better way where you could actually protect it because it's in front of you, so that for that you're chayav. If, however, it went from front to back, then it became a less valuable, a less normal way of carrying. For that, you're not chayav. That's not considered like you did it in the way you intended to do. So now, Rava is going to explain what was bothering Rav Elazar when he said that there's a stira and that it can't be the same person who said it to halachas. And that's, what is the halacha if you actually wore it behind your back the whole time? It didn't slip. You put it behind your back and it stayed behind your back. In a sense, that is more likely to be a problem than both of these cases, and therefore we have a contradicting implication. Let's reason it out. The Mishnah first says that if you intended to wear it in front of you and it slipped behind you, so then in that case you're not chayav. That would seem to imply because it slipped. But what's if you intend to wear it behind you and it stayed behind you? For that case you are chayav. Okay, then look at the later case of the Mishnah. If you intended to wear it in front of you, if you intended to wear it behind you and it slipped in front of you, then you are chayiv. That would seem to indicate that it's because it ended up in front of you. But if you intended to wear it behind you and it stayed behind you the whole time, for that you'd be potter. So we have conflicting mashmais about that case, conflicting implications about the case where you intended to wear it behind you and it stayed behind you. On the one hand, it's better than the first case because it stayed where you wanted. On the one hand, it's worse than the second case because it never went to the front. So conflicting implications. So that's it. Rav Elazar said that it has to be a contradiction. Two different people must have said these two halachas. So the Gemara now says Rav Ashi says, no, I'm going to read it for you in a way that it all works out. First of all, the Mishnah says that if it slipped to the back, it began in the front and slipped to the back, you're not chayav for that. Now, I don't have to tell you that if it stayed behind you the entire time, that you're chayav for that. You are chayav for that because it stayed how you meant it to be. But even if you tied it behind you and it slipped to the front, even in that case you are still chayiv. So all we're saying is a bigger chiddush than we could have said, but it's for sure obvious that if it stayed behind you the entire time that you're chayiv because it didn't change. Now the Gemara brings in another brisa. The brisa is discussing a different case, but the people in the brisa refer to this case, where you have it slung over your back and it stayed that way. And the Gemara wants to say that their machlokes is actually based around this particular case, what the halacha is there. So first of all, what's the case? The case is if you're carrying your money in a money belt upside down. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Yichai for that, that's normal. And the Chachamim say, no, you're part for that, that's not considered safe and secure. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda said to them, what do you mean? Shouldn't this be the same as the case where it's slung over your back? Just like if it's slung over your back. You're chayiv even though it's not secure. So in the money belt upside down, it's also not secure. So the Gemara says, the Chachamim said, what are you talking about? What would you say in the case where it's on your hand or your foot? That's also not secure. And you're going to say, for sure, you're going to agree with me that in that case, it's not secure and therefore you're putter. So this case of the money belt upside down is also not secure, so you should be putter. Meaning they both brought a case which was not secure. And Rabbi Yehuda said, well, the case of behind your back is clearly chayiv, and therefore this not secure case is also chayiv. And the Chachamim said, well, on your foot or on your hand is not secure, and your patur, so this is also not secure, so you are Potter. So the Gemara says the end of the Brisa is, Rabbi Yehuda says, I say my way, they say their way, and neither of us have found a way to prove that the other one is wrong. So now, the Gemara says that it would seem to be that they're arguing over the case of behind your back, because Rabbi Yehuda brought a proof from behind your back that you're chayiv, and obviously there are Rabbanan who disagreed, held that case is not a proof because you're Potter. The Gemara says, no, what makes you say that that's what the machlekes is? If that was the machlekes, then the other case that the Chachamim brought, they'd argue about that also, where it's on your hand or your foot. Where Rabbi Yehuda didn't accept that as proof of that, because he also held that hand of your foot is not Potter like the Chachamim said it is. Obviously not, because nobody in the world would say that on your hand or your foot is chayiv. So what's really the machlekes? What's going on over here? Everybody agrees that on your back is chayiv, and everybody agrees on your foot is Potter. The question is, the muddy belt, which case is that comparable to? Is that as bad a watching as on your foot? Or is that a better watching, just like the case of behind your back, even though all three of them are not perfect? Okay, the next halacha which we saw in the Mishnah was that if a woman wore it in a sina or some form of an underclothing, so then it's chayiv either way. The Mishnah introduced that halacha by saying be'emes amru. The Gemara says, anytime you say that phrase, be'emes amru, that means that this is the halacha. The next thing the Mishnah said was that Yehuda said that the letter carriers, the mailman, is chayiv even if it slips around front to back or back to front. The Gemara brings the Bryce, explains that because that's normal for letter carriers to carry things like that. Okay, great. This ends this discussion, and now we get to the next Mishnah. And the Mishnah is discussing where two people did a malacha together, who is chayiv for it. So generally the rule is that if you're doing something in an abnormal way, it's not an Isser D'Oraisa. So the Mishnah brings two opinions, and we're going to have a Brisa with a third opinion. First of all, the Mishnah says in an obvious introduction, if somebody carries a loaf of bread by himself from Rishos HaYachid to Rishos HaRabim, he's violating the Isser D'Oraisa. Now if two people carried out a loaf of bread together, in a normal situation, it's the type of thing that one person can carry just fine by himself. If two people carry it together, it's not normal, therefore it's not an Isser D'Oraisa. Now what if it's a loaf of bread that they each could not have carried alone? So here we have a machlekes. The Tanna Kama says if they couldn't carry it, so it's a normal way to do it when they do it together, and they're both chayiv. But Rosh Shimon says no, both are potter, they did not violate the Isser D'Oraisa. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa which brings three opinions here, and three different cases. So the first case is where two people are carrying something together, but each one could have carried it alone. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir says that both are in violation of an Isser D'Oraisa, even though each one could have done it alone. However, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon both say that's not an Isser D'Oraisa. If, however, neither of them could do it himself, so now Rabbi Meir joins Rabbi Yehuda, and he says that it's an Isser D'Oraisa because it's a normal way of doing it, but Rabbi Shimon still says that it's not Asr. The only case in which everybody agrees that it's an Isser D'Oraisa is if one person could have carried it himself and the other person could not have carried it himself, and they carry it together, everybody agrees there's an Isser D'Oraisa going on there. And the Gemara in the next daf will explain what that case is. So now the Gemara says that we saw a similar case in a brisa, a similar description of opinions in a brisa, and that says as follows: somebody carries a challah, a loaf of bread, from Rishos HaRabim to Rishos HaYachid, so he's over an Isser D'Oraisa. However, if two people took it out together, so Rabbi Meir says they're both chayav, like we saw before. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it depends. If neither of them was able to carry it himself and two people carried it out, so then it's normal. They're both chayav, like we saw. If, however, they each could have carried it himself, so then it's not normal, and therefore they both potter. Reb Shimon, though, says that you're not chayav even in that case, even if they would not have done it alone, you're still not chayav. The Gemara now begins a lengthy discussion to try to figure out where each one gets his opinion from and what his source is, but it's a long discussion and it's going to run deep into the next daf, so we will hold Daf Tzadi Beis here and pick it up with Daf Tzadi.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.